Let's start out with a wood blank from the Dollar Tree. And we are going to be using this uncrafting paper that I found on Amazon. And this is such a beautiful rice paper. It is from Stampery, and I will put a link for it in my description box below if you're interested. So next we're going to prep our blank. And to do this, I'm just going to remove the hanger, and then we'll grab our Mod Podge. And I'm just using the matte Mod Podge for this. And what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to brush the Mod Podge over the top of this blank. And once that has completely dried, I'm going to lay my piece of rice paper over the top of this blank. And I'm just going to position it where I want the print on this on the blank. Next, I grabbed a piece of parchment paper, and I'm just going to lay that over the top of the rice paper. And using my hot iron, I'm just going to iron this on to our blank. And I love this technique for decoupage. When you're able to do this on a flat surface and you're able to iron on the piece, you have no wrinkles. And that hot iron just reactivates the Mod Podge underneath, so everything glues on like a sticker. Next, I'm going to remove the excess rice paper by using a sanding block. And this is just a zip sander or a finger sander, but you can use a sanding block or a piece of sandpaper. An emery board works well too, and I just am going around the piece and I'm sanding off that paper. And we'll save that rice paper for another craft. Next, I grabbed a razor blade, and I'm just taking that razor blade and I'm scoring where that line was there originally. And I'm just going to remove a little bit of that paper with the razor blade. And once I've done that a few times, I've just kind of scored it. I'll come back in with that little zip sander, and I just sand off any of that excess paper really carefully on the edge. And now to seal everything in, I grab my Mod Podge, and I'm just going to paint a coat over the top of this rice paper. And now for some final touches. I'm going to use these rub-on transfers that I got from the Dollar Tree and this metal tag. And I decided to cut out the phrase, "Simply Blessed." And if you've never used rub-on transfers, these are great. They're a simple thing that you can use to add an embellishment to any piece. So I'm just going to take the backing off and place it onto my tag. And I'm using a popsicle stick, and I'm just going to rub that piece onto my little tag. And once I'm happy with everything that I've done, I'm going to go ahead and pull that off. And everything should just blend right onto your piece. Now, if you don't think it's all the way on there, you can always go back and re-rub on that transfer if you need to. And I had a little empty spot on the tag, and I wanted to add a flower. So I had another set of rub-on transfers that I got at the local Ben Franklin, and I'm going to go ahead and just place that on there as well. And it's the same method where we're just going to use our popsicle stick and rub that onto our tag. Let's go ahead and put everything back together. I am going to go ahead and use a screwdriver here just to re-poke the holes back into my sign. And then we'll just reattach the hanger. Now let's go ahead and add our tag. And I'm taking some green ribbon here that I thought went well with my piece. And I'm going to use that to string on my tag and attach that to the top of our little sign here. And what I did was I just took the ribbon and I tied it around the knot of our hanger. And then I'm going to tie a really nice bow right there. Next, we'll just trim any of the excess ribbon off. To ensure that our tag stays into place, I'm going to be using this super glue tape that I found at the Dollar Tree. And this stuff works really good. And I'm just going to cut a small piece and add that to the back side of the tag, and then just place the tag exactly where I want it. And that's all there is to it. This adorable sign is ready to hang. I feel like this is such a great piece for the spring. And if you haven't tried using rice paper, this would be a fun one to try. Let me know what you think in the comments below. So I tend to collect a whole bunch of canvases. Whenever I see them at the dollar store and it's a different shape, color, size, I tend to pick them up and have them in my stash. So for this craft, we're going to start out with an 8x6 canvas. And what you see me doing here is I'm just taking a screwdriver and a pair of pliers, and I'm going to remove the canvas from the wood frame. Now that we have those taken apart, I'm going to start out with just the canvas piece. Next, I'm going to lay this canvas piece down on a paintable surface. I'm taking some painter's tape and I'm just going to tape that down to this piece of cardboard. And now that everything is secured and laid out, I'm grabbing some Mod Podge, and I'm using the matte Mod Podge for this project. And we're just going to put a nice coat of Mod Podge over the top of this canvas. Now let's go ahead and set that aside to dry, and I'm going to prep my napkin. I found these beautiful napkins at Home Goods a few months ago, and I had to get them. I just loved how they had like a decorative background in the back side of this napkin and then the flowers over the top of it. And I think it just gave it a whole bunch of dimension and it looked amazing. So we're starting out by taking a little piece of painter's tape, and I'm just going to remove the bottom 2 layers of the napkin to prep that. Now let's grab our canvas with the dried on Mod Podge, and we're just placing the napkin over the top and just trying to find out where we want the napkin to be placed on top of this canvas. And I wanted it to look like the flowers were kind of around the outside of what I'm going to put in the center here. So this is how I decided to lay out my napkin. Now I'm going to grab a piece of parchment paper and lay that over the top of the napkin, and using my iron here, I'm just going to iron that on just to make sure everything stays into place. And what the iron does is it warms up the Mod Podge that has dried, and it allows the napkin to adhere really nicely to the top of the canvas. And by using the iron, you have like no wrinkles. So this is just a really good way to do your Mod Podge so it's nice and flawless. Now let's go ahead and take this off of our piece of cardboard, and I'm just using a quick pair of scissors here and cutting any excess napkin off of the canvas. And just to make sure I don't make a big mess, I do put this back on top of that piece of cardboard, and I grab my Mod Podge, and I'm just going to do a top coat over the top of the napkin to make sure that everything is all nice and sealed. I'll set that aside to dry, and we'll go ahead and grab that wood frame. With this wood frame, I'm just taking my antique wax and I'm going to stain the outside of the frame. Now, I had these rub-on transfers that I've had for at least a year, probably 2. And I'm going to grab this one, and I want to cut out the one that says "Make It Happen." So I want to put this sign up in my office just to give me motivation. I'm going to take this rub-on transfer, and I use a piece of a paint stick. So I just cut that to size. I'm just going to set that right on top. Next, I'll grab a popsicle stick, and I'm just going to rub this on until everything is adhered to that paint stick. There was a little bit of overhang from that rub-on transfer, so I just kind of rubbed that down around the corners just so you couldn't see the bare wood. Next, I grabbed my burnt umber from Apple Barrel, and I'm just going to take a little bit of paint here, and I'm going to paint that around the outside of the edge of this little paint stick, just to make sure it looks nice and polished before I attach this to my sign. While we have the paint out, I did tape down this little heart cutout that I had from the Dollar Tree, and I'm just going to paint that with the same burnt umber paint. Originally, I thought I was just going to dry brush it really quickly, and that didn't work out, so we just painted the whole entire heart. Let's go ahead and put this all together. One of the things that I did notice after I was looking closer at the napkin, there was a little blue line, and it was not the whole way down on the napkin, but it was just a little bit, and it must have been maybe from printing the napkin or something like that. And so that is why I painted that heart a minute ago is because I am going to use that heart to cover up that little spot because I don't want to waste this beautiful napkin just because of that little imperfection. So I started out here by drawing a little line around the frame with my pencil so that I would know where I'm going to cut the canvas so that it will fit perfectly inside this frame. Once I'm satisfied with the canvas and the frame fitting together, I'm going to flip this over and I'll take that canvas off of the frame and I'm going to use this Aleene's tacky glue. And this glue is great. If you don't have that, you could use hot glue or Elmer's glue or pretty much any glue that you have around the house. But this, I think, worked really well with the canvas and the wood. Once I have that all the way around the frame, we're going to just lay that canvas right back on top of the frame. Next, I grab my staple gun and I'm just going to add a few staples to make sure that everything stays in place. Now let's flip this over and decorate our sign here. And I'm grabbing the heart and making it happen. And at first I was going to do the heart with hot glue. And then I thought about it and I'm like, I don't want that hot glue to show through. So what I decided to do was I took that Aleene's tacky glue again. And I'm just going to put a little of it in a bowl. And I'm taking a paintbrush and I'm just going to paint that glue right over the top of the backside of the heart. Then once I've done that, I'm going to just place this over the top of the spot where that blue ink is on the napkin. And this covers that spot perfectly. And the glue here will dry clear, which is what I wanted because I didn't want all of those strings and things from the hot glue. And for the Make It Happen wood piece, I am going to use hot glue for this because you're not going to see that hot glue behind it because there's no holes in it. So I just did that really quickly and I placed that down underneath. And this sign is complete. And I just love how this sign turns out. I can't wait to display this in my office. So while I was at the Dollar Tree, I found these new wood frames. I'm going to start out by using the circle one with a plate that I got at the Dollar Tree and a napkin that I got from Home Goods. We're going to take these three items and make a beautiful decor piece. Let's start out by prepping our napkin. And if you notice here, this napkin has 1/6 of it that has the foil inlay on it, and I want to make sure that's displayed in our piece. So I'm taking a little piece of painter's tape here and I'm just going to remove the back 2 layers of the napkin. And once we have those layers removed, I'm going to grab that little plate that we found at the Dollar Tree. Next, I grabbed my Mod Podge and I'm going to use the glossy Mod Podge for this. Now this plate I did find in the Crafter Square section and it is unfinished. It's just a pottery type plate. And so that is what I'm going to be using for this piece. Now going back to that napkin, I'm just going to cut this in half so it's easier to use. Now let's go ahead and lay that napkin over the top of this plate. And since I want to use the part of the napkin that has that gold foil in there, I center that in the middle of my plate so you'll see most of that gold foil on the plate. Next, I'm going to grab a piece of cling wrap and I'm just going to lay that over the top. Now I'm going to fold this down about halfway and I'm going to take my Mod Podge and I'm going to paint the plate with the Mod Podge. Now we're going to fold that napkin back over the top of the Mod Podge and using our cling wrap, we're going to smooth out that napkin. Then we'll just repeat this same step on the other side of the plate. So while that is drying, let's go back to that wood piece. And we're going to take some plaster paint here. And I added a little bit of water to this paint just to thin it out a little bit. And I'm going to take and I mix this up with a brush, but instead I'm going to apply this with a sponge brush. because I felt like this would get around everything a little bit better than the brush. And I am going to paint both the front and the back of this piece because you may still see the back side a little bit, so I wanted to make sure it was seamless on all sides. And while that piece is drying, let's go back to our plate that has already dried. So I'm going to take the same Mod Podge here, and this is the glossy Mod Podge, and I'm going to do a coat of the Mod Podge over the top of this napkin, and then we're just going to let this dry again. Now that everything has dried, I grab my zip sander, but a sanding block or an emery board or a piece of sandpaper would just be fine. And I am just sanding down in a downward motion on the outside perimeter of this plate. And the napkin just falls right off. And now that our plate is ready to go, let's go ahead and put everything together. I grab my Tight Bond Quick and Thick glue, and I'm going to do a bead of glue around the perimeter of this plate. Now let's go ahead and grab our wood frame here, and we're going to set that right on top of our glue. Off camera, I did put a book on top of this and let this sit for about 2 hours before moving on to this next step. So now for some finishing touches. I have this gold ribbon left over from Christmas from Walmart, and I absolutely love this ribbon. And this ribbon goes really well with that gold foil inlay that's around the flowers. So what I'm doing here is I am just going to add a piece to the top to make as a hanger. And once I have tied that to the top there, I did dovetail my ends just so that they looked a little bit more finished. And once I was satisfied with the hanger, I did make a little bow off camera. And if you want to learn how to make a bow, I'll put a link right here for you if you want to see a quick way to make a bow. But we're just going to glue that hanger into place to make sure it stays where you want it. And then I'm going to take some more hot glue and I'm going to hot glue that bow right to the center of that hanger. And now our beautiful little plate is ready to display. I just love how this turns out. I just think this brings so much to the plate and the decoupage and gives it a very elegant look. And if you don't want to decoupage a plate, you could just use a regular plate that you have that fits inside this frame. And if you're enjoying this content, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button below. Thanks! I just love these palettes from the Dollar Tree, and for this project, we're going to take 2 of these palettes and attach them together. To do this, I'm going to flip them over onto the back side. And using some wood glue, I'm going to go ahead and just put a little bit of this glue and smush these 2 palettes together. And next, I'm going to grab my staple gun and just add a few staples to try to help put this together. And after I did that, I didn't feel like this was sturdy enough. So what I did was I took a popsicle stick and I'm just going to glue that in the center there to brace everything. But I'm only going to use a short piece so that way you can't see it through the palette. To attach this, I'm just using a little bit of wood glue and hot glue. After about 2 hours, this was totally ready for me to start working on. So we're going to go ahead and put this onto a paintable surface, and I grab my Waverly chalk paint in the color Plaster. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to dry brush this paint onto my palette, but I didn't want it to be very thick on the palette. So what I wanted to do here is I took a little spray bottle of some water and I just spritzed the palette down and a little bit on where the paint was. And this helped just thin the paint out a little bit, so it's more like a stain and less like a paint. While we have the paint out, I'm going to go ahead and give a little coat of paint on these pine cone flowers that I made. And these are really easy to make. I just used some outdoor clippers with some pine cones that I had left over from Christmas. And if you want to see a more detailed description on how to make these, I do have a video that I'm going to link up here where I show how I make the pine cones from start to finish. While everything is drying, I am going to prep my napkin. And I found this beautiful napkin at Home Goods, and I just love their selection on napkins. To prep this napkin, all I'm doing is removing the bottom 2 layers. So I use a little piece of painter's tape, and that helps assist me pull apart the layers from the napkin. Now let's go back to our palette board. I'm going to use some Mod Podge, and I'm just doing a nice layer of Mod Podge over the top of these wood pieces. Once that is completely dry, then we're going to apply the napkin. So with this napkin, I'm positioning it in the center of the napkin because of the borders on it. So we're just going to see the left and the right border. We won't see the top and the bottom border on our palette. After that, I grab a piece of parchment paper and I place that over the top of our napkin, and using my hot iron, I'm just going to iron that down, which will reactivate the Mod Podge and allow that napkin to stick nicely to those wood pieces. Next, we're going to take the Mod Podge and we're going to paint that Mod Podge over the top of just the wood pieces on the board. What this is going to allow us to do is just kind of seal that napkin in prior to us sanding, so none of that accidentally sands off while we're sanding between the slats. This is when you need to pack your patience and just let that sit and dry. And once that is completely dry, and this did take a few hours, I then went back in with my zip sander, and I'm just going to sand in a downward motion all the way around the exterior of this board. Next, what I like about this zip sander is it's so small, it fits really nice inside the different slats in between. So you can just sand in between, and then I just take a little brush, a paintbrush, and I just dust off any extra napkin. And if you don't have a zip sander, don't worry, a piece of sanding paper will work as well. Otherwise, you can also use like a nail file or an emery board. That also will get in between those slats really nicely. So now for our final touches. I'm going to use this ribbon, and this ribbon I did get at Walmart. They have it usually all year around, but they definitely have it out during the fall season as well. What I like when they get them out at the fall season is that if they don't sell out, they do go on clearance right after fall before Christmas. So I usually pick up a few rolls of it then because I love this ribbon. And I'm just going to cut it to size and hot glue it to the back side of this piece just to make sure it sits nicely in the center of our piece. We're not going to stop there. I have this Simplicity ribbon as well, and this also came from Walmart. It does not have any wire in it at all. I think it's more of a trim piece, but I love this ribbon. And I'm just going to cut a small piece and put that in the center of our board and on top of that other ribbon. I found that the hot glue on the back side of the board was just enough to keep these ribbons in place, so I thought that was great. So now let's flip our board over, and I'm going to grab those pine cone flowers that we made earlier, and I'm just going to position the first one in the center of this board. And I had to use quite a bit of hot glue because it's a little bit of an uneven surface, and I go back and I add a little bit more hot glue. But once I got that glue down really well with the hot glue, it stayed perfectly. Now this next step is optional. I kept going back and forth on whether I wanted just the one pine cone flower or if I wanted to go with the 3 pine cone flowers. And eventually I just decided that I really like how one pine cone looked. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below if you would have done 1 flower or 3 flowers. And now here's our final decor piece. I love how this turns out. It's neutral but fun with that little bit of green in there. Who doesn't love a great cutting board project? This is a mini cutting board that would be great for a shelf sitter or for a tiered tray. Let's start out by putting this on a paintable surface, and I'm using some painter's tape just to tape that down so it doesn't move. I was out of my mineral colored Waverly chalk paint, so I needed to mix up a little bit of something that would kind of go with the napkin I'm using. So I'm using light mocha and white from Apple Barrel, and I'm just going to mix that paint together till I get the color that I want. I'm only going to paint the front face of this cutting board. I'm going to save the back side for another project later on, so that's why I like to do this. You can see that I got a little impatient here and I decided to grab out my heat tool and just dry that real quickly. Now let's go ahead and prep this beautiful napkin. I got this napkin at HomeGoods. It's a Martha Stewart napkin, and I really love this napkin. I've used it for different projects already, but this time what I want to use is the background of this napkin. At first, we have to prep our napkin, so I'm just removing the back 2 layers of the napkin, and I use a little piece of painter's tape, but Scotch tape works just as well, and that helps me remove those back 2 layers. As you can see here, this is one of those tough napkins that second layer just did not want to come off. It eventually did. It just took a lot of patience to do this. But once you do, it is well worth it. I love this napkin. We're going to use that water method again here, and I'm just going to trace around the outside of this butterfly, and I'm going to make as big of pieces that I can make with this napkin, just giving it a torn edge look. And it doesn't matter what shape they end up being in because we will tear them into pieces that we can use onto our cutting board. And now that we have our pieces, I'm going to get my cutting board and I'm going to just kind of play around with positioning where I want to put these napkins. And after I do that, I realize, oh no, I need to put my Mod Podge on. We'll just take those off, and then I grab my Mod Podge and do a nice light coat of Mod Podge on the top. And while the Mod Podge is still wet, I am going to place these pieces of napkins on top of our cutting board. To smooth everything out, I did use a piece of cling wrap and my little Mod Podge roller. Then I continue adding some Mod Podge and some more napkin and using that cling wrap until I'm satisfied with how the front of the cutting board looks. After this has completely dried, yes, I know that there's edges, but we're going to get those later. We are going to do a sealing coat over the top of this Mod Podge first, just so when we do our sanding to get rid of those extra edges, napkin then won't peel off of the cutting board. Now 2 or 3 hours later, once this has completely dried, I grabbed my zip sander and I started sanding in a downward motion just to remove any extra napkin. Now, if you don't have a zip sander, that's totally fine. Use a sanding block, a piece of sandpaper. You can even use an emery board. And if you're desperate, you can use a razor blade, just don't cut yourself. We have our beautiful canvas. I am grabbing one of these stencils, and this stencil is from Folk Art. And I'll leave a link for this stencil in my description box below. But it's a self-adhesive stencil. It is not a silkscreen, so it is a little bit different. It doesn't have that grid that a silkscreen would have. And what I've found with me with stenciling, I am not always the best stenciler, so I do like using the chalk paste when I am stenciling. And I am using a redesigned chalk paste cranberry, but it wasn't quite the color that I wanted to match the napkin. So I added a little bit of my chalk, Waverly chalk paint to my chalk paste so that I could make a slightly different color red. Just position our stencil onto the cutting board. And I also went and grabbed my Kingdom Moss chalk paste. So that way I can do both of these colors at the same time when I'm stenciling. And so I'm just using a little squeegee to do the flower first, and then I will do the green for the stem, and then we'll pull that stencil off. So I'll let you watch what I'm doing. One of the things that I really like about this stencil is that all the pieces are kind of separated, so you can just position them differently onto your piece. I think that's really helpful when you're doing stenciling. So on this one here, I am putting on the words "Let Love Grow," but I'm gonna have to position them just a little bit different since we're using a mini cutting board here. And I'm going to use my chalk paste in the color Iron Gate, and that was by Redesign. And I'll put links for all of these pastes in my description box below if you'd like, but I get them on Amazon. It's really easy to get. I do want to distress this a little bit, and to do that for this project, I am using my Waverly Antique Wax, and I'm just placing a little bit of that on a baby wipe, and I'm just going to lightly rub that around the edges of my cutting board and anywhere in between that I feel like it needs it. Now, once everything is completely dry, I did find these fun stamps at the Dollar Tree, and I'm going to use the butterfly for this project. And as you can see here, I have a really old stamp pad from Stampin' Up! And I thought, you know what, this might still work. It's been 20 years, but who knows? And it definitely is not working the way I wanted it. I did not have any other ink pads. So if you have any recommendations on a really good brand for ink, I need to invest in some new ones. So please send me a link or drop me a message down below and let me know what you guys think is a good ink pad. So to finish this project, I decided, well, they're Dollar Tree stamps. I'm going to try using some Waverly chalk paint. And so I just used some black chalk paint and I used that to stamp my little butterflies on. And actually the stamp cleaned up really nicely. So I should be able to reuse it. So the paint did not ruin it. So that was nice to know. Now I grabbed some jute twine and I just wrapped that around the top of my cutting board and hot glued that into place. And once I was done with that, I thought, well, it needs a tiny bit more. So let's go ahead and add a little bit more hot glue and a cute jute bow. And now our mini cutting board is complete. This turns out amazing. It is a great transition piece